Alright guys, so this is the lecture for modules 8 and 9. We're going to do both lectures in one sitting. So today, what we're going to talk about is, we're going to explain why economists are often deeply skeptical of attempts to intervene in the markets and identify who benefits and who loses from those price controls. Alright, so why does the government control prices? That's going to be, we're going to basically focus on if there's an external force, meaning the government controls the prices or quantity, then why that leads to inefficiency. Alright, so let's say that their market price for something moves to a level at which the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded, but this equilibrium price does not necessarily please either buyers or sellers. So either the price is too high for buyers or the price is too low for sellers. And so what will happen is those people will lobby the government to then intervene and regulate the prices by imposing what's known as price controls, which are legal restrictions on how high or low a market price may go. Now, a price ceiling is the maximum price sellers are allowed to charge for a good or a service. Can't go above the ceiling, right? So that's just the most someone can charge. A price floor is the minimum price buyers are required to pay for a good or a service. So either way, there's some sort of restriction on where the price can go. It does not allow it to reach its equilibrium point. Now, price ceilings are typically imposed during crises, wars, harvest failures, natural disasters, because these events often lead to sudden price increases that hurt many people but produce big gains for the lucky few. The most common example that's still around today is rent control in certain cities. New York is one famous example where there is rent control. So this is what a price ceiling looks like here. Let me get my pen ready. So let's say we have we've got a normal, that's not very good. Not a very good graph there. Alright, so we've got our normal market, we got our price, quantity. Alright, so we've got our supply curve and our demand curve. Alright, now this right here would be our normal equilibrium. So we'll label that price at the equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. Okay. However, with a price ceiling, what's going to happen is the government is going to say this price, even though it's the equilibrium point, is way too high. Alright, so we're going to restrict the price at this point. Right here. We'll label that price at the ceiling. Okay. That's a C, that's an E. Alright, now, basically what happens when we lower the price for anything, as we know, alright, from doing our examples in class, kind of the opposite. So we're going to have more demand, alright, it's going to be our quantity demanded, than we have supply, because sellers are not going to want to sell as many products, and there's going to be way more consumers now for those products. Alright, now to look at this in real life, basically, if this were apartments and the equilibrium rent here was, we'll just leave it as red. Let's say the equilibrium rent was $1,000 a month, and at $1,000 a month there were 2 million apartments demanded and supplied. That's the efficient level. But let's say that society deems that that is too high of a price, and so the government steps in and says, okay, we hear your concerns, so we're going to lower rent to $700. Well, we can see that this leads to way more demanded than supply. Alright, so we'll skip over that. So that's why it leads to inefficiency. So these are the other reasons. So basically, there's inefficient allocation to customers. A few people will get those rent control apartments. A lot of people that demand them won't, and so there will be some sort of inefficiency there. Wasted resources. Basically not enough apartments to go around, and the people that finally get rent controlled apartments are going to stay there for a really long time because they don't have an incentive to move. This also leads to inefficiently low quality because the apartments that are still available to rent, the landlord is not going to step in and improve that, because why? They can't make any money for it. So that's the big reason why there's inefficiency there. Black markets, so let's say that there's a price ceiling here. We'll go back up here and explain it. So let's say you're renting a rent-controlled apartment. You're paying $700 a month for it, but you want to move out of the city. Well, you don't really want to give up your rent-controlled apartment for free. All right, so what you're going to want to do instead is you could say charge somebody, like let's say you had a friend that wanted to move into the city. You could say, hey, I've got a rent-controlled apartment. Normally you'd be looking at paying, $1,000 up here, but what if I sublease my apartment to you for only $900? Well, you still have to owe $700, but now you can make this $200 as personal profit. All right, now technically that's illegal because when you are renting a rent-controlled apartment, you are supposed to be the one that lives there. However, a lot of people do it. So that's just kind of what can happen in terms of a black market for a rent-controlled apartment. There are price ceilings pretty much from political pressure, and that's about it. Now, moving on to price floors, sometimes governments will intervene to push market prices up instead of down. The minimum wage is a legal floor on the wage rate, which is the market price of labor. Just like price ceilings, price floors are intended to help some people but generate predictable and undesirable side effects, which we'll look at here in a second. So a price ceiling is going to be the exact opposite of a price floor. All right, we're going to have our price and our quantity, our supply, and our demand. All right, now again, this would be our normal equilibrium point. This would be our equilibrium point there. Now, a price floor is going to prevent the price from dropping below a certain point. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a second, a price floor above the equilibrium, that doesn't make sense. But you got to remember, you're trying to prevent the price from dropping below a certain point to prevent it from reaching equilibrium. Equilibrium is too low in that case. You're trying to inflate the price a little bit. All right, so we're going to do the same thing here. This is going to be our quantity demanded and our quantity supplied at that point. Now, here we've got what's known as a shortage. That's really bad. I'm just going to erase that word. Just label that as a shortage. All right, because you have, sorry, ignore that completely. I don't know why I said that. Not a shortage. We've got a surplus. And if I could edit it, I would edit this out, but I'm too far in. So we're just pretending like I didn't say that. So here we've got a surplus. We have too much supply compared to too much demand. A price ceiling is going to cause the shortage that we talked about earlier. Agricultural products are very popular for having a price floor. So in Europe, butter is a really good example. It's in your textbook too. So dairy farmers struggle to make a profit because there's so much dairy out there in the marketplace. So what governments will do is they'll set a price floor on the price for dairy products such as butter. So they might set the floor here, charging people $1.20 per pound instead of $1 per pound, and that's just going to lead to too much supply. All right, and we have this in the United States as well. The government will actually buy up unpurchased cheese from dairy farmers to put in Ural's lunches and things like that. So that's what happens with the price ceiling. All right, we're gonna skip over that. Skip over that. Oh, that just talks about the lunch stuff. All right, for you. So it's been going on for a long time here. All right. Now, how a price floor causes inefficiency. Basically, there's going to be inefficiently low quality, inefficient allocation of sales among sellers. Basically, there's not going to be enough purchasers for the products, and so things aren't going to go to good use. There's going to be wasted resources. People are going to be making too much of a product because they're getting too high of a price, or they're going to think they're getting too high of a price for it. So you're going to have more people making it than there should be. You're also going to have inefficiently high quality because they're able to get more money for it, so they're going to provide extra services that they might not need to in a regular market. It's also going to lead to illegal activity as well. All right. So moving on to Module 9 real quick. We'll get through that here really fast. Not a whole lot here. So we just talked about price ceilings and price floors. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what happens when the government controls quantities, or when they put in a quota for something. All right. Now, a quantity control, or quota, is an upper limit on the quantity of some good that can be bought or sold. All right. A license gives its owner the right to supply a good. So anytime you have a quota, you're going to have licenses for people that are allowed to sell that product, because that's the only way you're going to be able to control the quantity sold for that good. The demand price of a given quantity is the price at which consumers will demand that quantity. The supply price of a given quantity is the price at which producers will supply that quantity. And basically, quotas will cause inefficiencies as well, so we'll see in a second. Basically what it does is it drives a wedge between the demand price and the supply price of a good. The price paid by buyers ends up being higher than that received by sellers, because what happens is you have an inefficient allocation of resources, and you have some people that get in that pay a lot of money to do it, but there's not transactions that can happen. All right. So basically what a quota looks like is we have our, and you're going to draw this on the graph here, got our supply and demand curve. Always make sure that you're drawing this and labeling it. I know it can seem like a lot, but I promise you it will help you on the AP exam. Alright, so a quota is going to be anytime you restrict the quantity from reaching where it should be. Now, when you draw a quota, normally you won't have to label it as quota up here. I just wrote that on there so that you knew. So we'll label that as Q, little q, for quantity at the quota. Now, you'll notice that here we have people that are willing to pay more of that quantity, but look at this. There's a whole bunch of transactions that could have happened right here. More people were demanding rides. There also could have been more suppliers supplying those rides. So basically what you're missing out on, I'll go ahead and color this in, we're going to label that as dead weight loss. Alright, we are missing out on those transactions that could take place. So you have consumers who don't get to purchase something because there's not enough available, and you have suppliers that aren't able to supply and make money off of those rides to people because it's just not allowed, right? You cannot exceed a certain quantity for things. One of the most prevalent quotas that we have are taxi cabs in big cities like New York. This is where Uber kind of fights with taxi cab companies. Basically, for a while, taxi cabs dominated. They dominated the industry, and that was the only way you could get a ride somewhere if you didn't have a car. But then Uber came in and disrupted it. We'll talk more about it in class. But basically, because taxi cabs had so limited the amount of rides that people could get, there was a need for someone to step in and fill that void and supply those rides that people were missing out on, and people benefited, right? You could get a ride anywhere just from your phone, and drivers could make some money. All right, now we'll talk about some problems Uber's had since then, but I think it's good. So dead weight loss occurs because some mutually beneficial transactions do not occur. We'll talk more about this in class here, about how people put quotas on fishing and things like that, and there are certain things you can do to help save the environment in terms of putting a quota or tax on things that we'll talk about more as the class goes on. But that's basically the big thing right there, is that you prevent those mutually beneficial transactions from taking place. And let me make sure I'm not missing anything or forgetting to go over something. No, that looks like it. So thank you guys very much for watching once again. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.